We're doing pretty well here. We have about 250 people in and more joining. It's great to have a great crowd for today's webinar. My name is John Colborn. I'm Executive Director with Apprenticeships for America. And we couldn't be happier to be joined today with our policy partners at the America Forward Coalition to be talking with you about pay for success in apprenticeships. And let me just say, we have been working on the field report we're going to be presenting today over the last couple of months. We were not planning that just as we were releasing the report, that there would be a funding announcement from the Department of Labor relating to pay for success in apprenticeship. And so I guess timing is everything. We're just very pleased to be able to provide some background from the report and talk with you a little bit about the opportunity that's been announced by the Department of Labor. Our plan for today is my colleague from Apprenticeships for America, Zach Boren, is going to be talking with you a little bit about what we know from the announcement from the Department of Labor. It's still not a formal solicitation for proposals. So we just have to have a caveat around what we're able to say at this stage, but Zach will be presenting that. And then our good friends at the America Forward Coalition are going to be talking about the Pay for Success report that was issued just last week. And that will be the basis for our conversation. And we think highly informative to those who are looking at the Department of Labor solicitation, either as possible proposers or as partners to proposers. Let me just start with a little bit of housekeeping. Because we have a large crowd today, now up to 360 people, want to just ask people to keep your mute on. Oh, yeah, thank you, Zach, for getting our slide up here. Keep your mute on, use the chat. We will be monitoring the chat and want to use that as a way to engage our audience. We'll have a few opportunities for folks to offer comments. We really have to ask you to use the raise hand feature in order that we can recognize you.
That's right.
And the slides and a
Fine.
recording of the webinar will be available after the webinar. So for folks who aren't able to join, just let them know that they will have access to that, and we'll be sending out links to that after the webinar. I want to just say a couple of words
Come on.
by way of background. The first thing is just to talk a little bit about some events coming up here. So first off, Apprenticeships for America, if you don't know us, we are the trade association for apprenticeship in the United States. We have a regular program of events, webinars like this one, a conference coming up, research reports, and the like. So want to encourage you to think about attending on January 29th, a webinar we have planned with our friends in Arkansas, where we will be talking with them about a new program to support Pay for Success funding in manufacturing. This is a national program that the state of Arkansas is providing. So if you're doing work or think you might be doing work on apprenticeship in the manufacturing area, this will be a good webinar for you, and a link for signing up for that webinar will be appearing in the chat. Also want to let you know that coming up in May, Apprenticeships for America has its third annual Apprenticeship Summit taking place in Washington, D.C. Once again, in the chat, there's an opportunity for you to explore that opportunity. We'd love to see you in person at our summit. And then also want to encourage you to think about connecting with Apprenticeships for America if you're not already. So if you're not on our mailing list and would like to be, we'll be providing a link for that. And if you're not a member of Apprenticeships for America, we would love to have you as a member, and we'll be providing a link for that. So that's by way of background. The last thing I want to just say is that we've been incredibly gratified by our partnership with the America Forward Coalition. And if you are interested in the application of social entrepreneurship to social change and to service delivery activities, and are interested in accountable and effective systems for doing that, the America Forward Coalition is a great group to connect with, and we encourage you, as we have, to consider joining the coalition as a member. With that as background, I'm going to turn this over to Zach Boren, who's going to walk us through what we know about the grant opportunity that's been announced by the Department of Labor, and then we'll move to a discussion of the report. Zach?
Well, great. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Freddie, keep on admitting people in. I think we're up to about 450 folks online. So keep on seeing more folks join. Just a quick reminder to mute yourself if you can. Um, so here's what we know about Pay for Success and a little bit about this forecast that the Department of Labor has been telling us since early January. So we're just kind of getting the details now. So, really at its core, Pay for Success is about paying for results and not just activity. So, and apprenticeships are really well suited for that. Apprenticeships, we can agree up front what success looks like. For the most part, looks like registration, retention, and potentially completion. There may be other areas too that the Department of Labor and future pay for success, pay for performance models look like. Um, you'll also hear AFA say pay for apprenticeship. So all these things are synonymous. So when we're saying pay for success, pay for performance, pay for apprenticeship, we're all talking about pretty much the same thing. So there are other areas that we're looking at too in pay for performance models, especially around apprenticeships going forward. That could look like wage gains, could look like quality jobs where apprentices are placed. We don't know that yet in this upcoming forecast. The funding will be tied to certain milestones, we believe. So one is definitely going to be registration, and that the payments will only occur either to the intermediary or the sponsor or the employer when those apprentices are actually registered and retained in that apprenticeship. So this creates some aligned incentives around supporting sponsors and intermediaries where they're rewarded for quality, as well as kind of the follow through, making sure that they're actually getting registered, getting connected with their standards, getting connected with mentors, and that they actually begin that work. So that takes a little bit of the risk off of the government. Grants are often designed around, you put out the money and you pray that folks get trained and that we prepare enough apprentices. This actually flips the risk value here on for the government, and it's a really exciting effort to see this come to fruition. So, um, kind of moving on, I wanted to just kind of chat a little bit deeper about what this pay for performance investment forecast looks like, what we know so far, what we're hearing, and what we can expect. So, we talked about $145 million for pay for performance forecast. Um, and that's to expand registered apprenticeships nationwide. So it's the largest federal investment that we know of, that we've counted to date. So that's super exciting for us at AFA, just to see about 50% of the what we think is the FY26 dollars being invested in this method. How the structure works, a couple of things just to note. We anticipate 5 cooperative agreements, at least that's what's been forecasted. They'll be for both new and existing registered apprenticeship programs. We imagine that, or the forecast tells us that it'll be those cooperative agreements will be between 10 and 40 million, so very large investments as well. They identified a few industries that they're really interested in. The first one is really fascinating to me, where we're talking about AI, semiconductors, nuclear energy infrastructure build out. That's a lot of words. So we're going to learn a little bit more about what that looks like. The other ones are a little bit more straightforward: shipbuilding, industrial defense base, IT, healthcare, transportation, and telecommunication. So we anticipate 4 of these to be kind of aligned to those industries. And then a fifth one we're anticipating to be an all of the above kind of cooperative agreement. So Again, these federal dollars are going to be tied more to results rather than activities, plans, and inputs. I think the other interesting thing is that the Department of Labor puts these out as cooperative agreements. And I've worked on cooperative agreements before. I think what's really fascinating about those is that you sort of set out like what the structure will look like for the period, for the 4 years. And then as conditions and landscape changes on the ground, the government can say, hey, we want a little bit more of this or a little less of that. We want you to focus here, perhaps. And so that'll be something that, these partnerships that come together, and that's what these are going to be. They're going to be partnerships with industry associations, unions, regional groups, where you imagine a lot of partners being required to come together to be able to be ready for this grant opportunity. So, the ultimately the impact here is that this announcement is going to come out on January 29th. There'll be some shifts along the way too. We're going to learn a lot, but it reinforces what apprenticeships do well, and that's tracking progression, quality training, and outcomes. And that really means moving people into good jobs. So from there, I just want to say thanks, and I'll shift it over to Chase to introduce our guests here. And I'm going to go back one more slide. And Chase, I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Zach. It's great to see you all. And well, actually, we're going to introduce in just a sec. You're going to hit to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit more about the report, and then we'll get into a conversation with some leaders from the field. First, so as you heard from John and Zach, we're talking about pay for success apprenticeship. So just to be extremely clear with what we mean here, to quote from our report, the pay for success model funds apprenticeship sponsors on a predetermined pre-apprenticeship basis and only pays out for real outcomes when apprenticeships are hired and training, graduating, and succeeding in their careers. It's just so everyone's on the same page about what our report's about. And again, my name's Chase Sackett, and I'm the policy director at America Forward. And thank you so much, John, for the very kind introduction. We partner with more than 100 of the most innovative, evidence-focused, non-governmental providers and intermediaries across the country to advance more effective public policies. I'm going to share a little bit more about our design recommendations, and then we'll hold a conversation with some of the incredible practitioners that we spotlighted in the report. I just want to say thanks so much again to my co-author, Harry Leach, and our partners at Apprenticeships for America for just being absolutely incredible partners and leaders in this field. I'm so grateful for your partnership. And we're also very grateful to Arnold Ventures for their support for this initiative at America Forward. Next slide, please. Sorry, slide before this, I think. Looks like it got lost. So first, as I think many folks on this call are already on board with the concept, I'll say a few more words about the case for pay for success apprenticeships to tee up our recommendations. As I think many of you would agree, apprenticeships are uniquely powerful in that they are jobs with structured training tailored to a specific occupation. That power also relies on many partners, including employers and intermediaries, to make all the necessary pieces come together to make them work as effectively as possible, which also means setting the right incentives for those players' participation if we want to scale and strengthen apprenticeships. And, as we've seen, policymakers across the nation and at all levels of government have recognized the potential value of the apprenticeships model. At the same time, as many of you have also seen, public investment has really lagged behind the public conversation. The latest dollars for fiscal year 2026 federal apprenticeships funding looks like it'll be the same as last year, $285 million. And that's really just a drop in the bucket relative to total investment in career training and post-secondary education. And we think a focus on outcomes can help make a very tangible case for expanded investment. And the dynamics of the grants-based model for public investment, along with that low funding level, have slowed growth in apprenticeships to date versus what we could see otherwise. And as many of you all have seen, the emphasis on competitive grants funding makes it very challenging to grow and sustain strong models as opposed to the dependable formula-based funding used in other nations that have seen much greater participation. And we think leveraging outcomes-based payment structures can help set the stage for a formula-based model across the board. And then the complex structure of the registered apprenticeship system is also a big barrier to participation. We think over the long run, a pay-for-success system offers a way to emphasize outcomes while reducing bureaucracy and increasing flexibility. If folks would just mind muting themselves, thank you. And then critically, a pay-for-success structure also offers a way to strengthen quality through clear incentives, both in terms of completion and post-apprenticeship outcomes like earnings and in-field full-time employment. Today, only about 4 in 10 registered apprentices complete their programs, and we think we can do better. So you can see here our recommendations for a series of pay for success apprenticeships pilots financed and coordinated by the federal government. Our first recommendation is to rigorously test the payment structure design and amounts per apprenticeship. A handful of states, as Apprenticeships for America has done a terrific job in highlighting, have paved the way for incentive-based financing and apprenticeships. And that ranges from California's apprenticeship incentive funding that pays a $1,000 completion bonus to Arkansas's 50-50 model for practical nurse apprenticeships that provides funding upfront and after completion. We propose piloting an array of pay for success models with different payment structures supported by expert support in these pilots design. We also recommend leveraging high quality evaluation and the use of administrative data to validate outcomes and meaningfully set the stage for expanding pay for success approaches through state-led financing. We also think it's incredibly important to leverage this structure to engage new sectors. Substantially expanding participation in apprenticeships requires engaging new players, including providers and their employer partners. Pay for success approaches can provide financial incentives to incorporate new sectors, and this should really be a focus of the pilots. For reference, AFA's recent analysis identified the sectors with the greatest capacity for expansion as manufacturing, business services, education, healthcare, and IT, alongside continued growth in residential construction. We'd love to see the pilots prioritize new populations, including through pre-apprenticeship pipelines. And we think this approach aligns very well with the Trump administration's America's Talent Strategy, which emphasizes the importance of, quote, workforce strategies that strengthen transitions into employment for populations such as veterans and individuals who are formerly incarcerated. To do so, the pilots, for example, might add a weight to the financial model that encourages participation by certain populations. And also recognizing the importance of expanding the pipeline for apprenticeships, one of the pilots could, for instance, test incentives for pre-apprenticeships that lead to successful apprenticeships. And again, following on the point about sectors, we think it's really important to incentivize new providers. One thing we particularly recommend emphasizing is the importance of engaging some of the workforce models with a particularly strong evidence base. And that includes things like sectoral employment programs and employment social enterprises. And the evidence shows to us that many of these programs, which again you'll hear from in a minute, work so well because they provide robust coaching and wraparound supports. And we think it's really important that new financing structures have incentives to provide that kind of effective support moving forward. And thinking about costs and funding streams, we really think the payment structure should address the work of marketing, organizing, and supporting apprenticeships by funding group sponsors, not just compensating employers. We also suggest setting a higher incentive than many states currently use, given evidence that those incentives are often too low to encourage employers and other participants to overcome the cost of engaging. AFA has previously proposed for reference a rate of about $4,000 to $5,000 per apprentice. And we also suggest leveraging opportunities to align with other funding sources, ranging from Workforce Pell, which included many interesting provisions aligned with apprenticeships and the recent proposed language from last month, the Department of Education, to the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. And finally, we think it's incredibly important to provide strong technical assistance. Decades of experience in pay for success approaches has demonstrated that expert assistance is critical to ensure the strong design implementation of these programs. We really don't want to see these pilots as just another addition to a big graveyard of pay for success pilots. We want these to inform policy design moving forward in a structured way. Next slide, please. And now about what this could look like in practice. And as you heard from John and Zach, we did not know when we released this report that DOE was going to forecast $145 million in the aligned approach. We're excited to learn more about soon. But here are some of the ideas that we've shared and discussed with folks in the past and are highlighted in our report. First, on the administrative side, we see two main options for pilots, and DOL and the federal government could choose both. One is for the states to act as the payers. That is, the states will compensate sponsors for outcomes. And working through the states is how the federal government has historically channeled most apprenticeships funding. So these pilots could set up a reframing of the current system based on lessons learned. And we would suggest engaging at least 5 states and pilots with different sectors and approaches, and leveraging at least $3 million per state to ensure the pilots are big enough to achieve real proof points. Another option is for the federal government to act as a payer. And we think this is interesting because it could help incentivize the growth of large-scale multi-state programs more easily. And we identified a few funding sources you'll see here for this approach beyond direct apprenticeship funding. So one is leveraging flexible H-1B dollars, which DOL has used for various priorities in the past. Another is the $100 million Social Impact Partnerships to Pay for Results Act, or CIPRA, at the Treasury Department. In 2018, Congress explicitly created this program to demonstrate the feasibility of federal support for evidence-based programs through pay for success financing. And following 2 rounds of SIPR grants, there's about $10 or $11 million left for another round of awards, which could emphasize apprenticeships. And then another option is the Perkins Innovation and Modernization Fund, potentially for youth-focused apprenticeships. And in fact, the program's authorization explicitly lists a Pay for Success initiative as an allowable use of funds. And then over the longer term, we really love to see Congress continue to emphasize and institutionalize the use of Pay for Success approaches, building on some great language in the fiscal year 2024 appropriations report requiring DOL to study Pay for Success apprenticeship options. We'd love to see support for Pay for Success apprenticeships, both through annual appropriations and aligned report language, as well as someday National Apprenticeship Act reauthorization. All right, so that's it for the report. And now we're so excited to turn to perspectives from the field. We're really grateful to be joined by 4 leaders of the incredible organizations highlighted in our Pay for Success apprenticeship report. First, Greg Kiesling, the president of Recycle Force. Recycle Force is an Indiana-based workforce organization that specializes in employing men and women as they're released from prison in a transitional job recycling electronics. And that job is designed to prepare participants for steady employment in the open market. I should also note Recycle Force is an employment social enterprise, a business built to do good through to empower people breaking through barriers to employment. And they boast really strong experimental evidence on their impact and are poised to expand their apprenticeships. And second, Julia Horn, Senior Director of Market Development and Strategy at Propel America. Propel is an emerging national sectoral employment model focused on addressing the healthcare talent shortage through an innovative, integrated model that helps young adults build upwardly mobile careers. And they've begun working with apprenticeships in multiple states. And we think Propel's core coaching and wraparound support model, alongside their incredible commitment to rigorous learning, is a great fit for the Pay for Success apprenticeship structure moving forward. And next, Michelle Sims, CEO of UPro Placement. UPro Placement is a staffing firm and subsidiary of the national sectoral training provider Europe United. They offer a scalable solution to help employers participate much more easily in apprenticeships. And I should also note that UPro Placement's groundbreaking efforts leverage Europe United's time-tested, evidence-based retention model to support apprentices, including underrepresented workers. And finally, Helen Young Hayes, founder and CEO of Activate Work. Activate Work is a Colorado-based workforce provider, intermediate, and group apprenticeship sponsor that helps employers meet critical IT and cybersecurity talent needs. And they do really terrific work to expand access to high-quality earn-and-learn pathways for adult learners historically excluded from traditional pathways. And they offer high-quality technology training in partnership with National Evidence-Based Sectoral Training Program for Scholars. So now with those introductions, excited to hear from them and less from me. So first, Greg, a question for you. Recycle Force has participated in outcomes-based financing in the past, and I would love to hear what attracts you all to the potential Pay for Success financing and apprenticeship specifically.
Well, thanks very much, Chase, and everybody on the call here today. This is a lot of people. I hope I have some friends out there. But Recycle Force has been fortunate to have participated in pay for performance contracts through some of the early welfare to work contracts in the 90s through non-custodial parents, and then through a great program out of DL called Beneficiary Choice. But they were very small compared to what we've been doing. In the type of programs that become a program about the program when we're trying to track things that are not really outcome. So what excites me, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an employment social enterprise entrepreneur, and I like to get paid for success, for the things that we know matter. And so the outcomes-based activities that we hope the federal government and DOL and other agencies will begin to look at are very exciting because we think it'll grow opportunities for employment social enterprises. It'll give us many more focuses on what really matters to the people coming home from prison that we serve.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Greg. And Julia, next, could you speak to the importance of incentives in apprenticeships financing based on Propel's experience?
Yeah, so Propel as an organization has only existed for about 6 years. And so and our history has been largely in a more traditional train to earn model. We recruit young adults, they get training, and they go to the employers afterwards. And of course, everybody here knows as well as I do that the apprenticeship model is really attractive for those young adults because they can get paid while they learn. And so Propel had an inherent interest based on our track record in pivoting to an apprenticeship model. And we needed somewhere to try it out, and we didn't have any experience doing it. And so we looked to California. We operate existing training programs in Los Angeles County. And we were seeing rapid growth there in our traditional training model. And California has some of the best incentives for kicking off apprenticeship programs, particularly in the states that Propel currently works in. And so we targeted that for a planning grant. And the planning grant was really pivotal for us because we had no prior knowledge of apprenticeships, and we are baby beginners at this. So Propel has 5 apprentices in our first cohort. They just started 3 months ago. So I will level set and say, like, we are we are the beginners in the room, and I've been really reliant on many folks in this room as we have learned. And so targeted California because that planning grant gave us space to learn, figure it out, try stuff on with our employers in California and figure out the best way to get them on board. And now, as we look to expand, frankly, there's a lot of incentive for us to grow within California because they have existing pay for success funding options that can apply both to our LA work and looking beyond LA in the rest of California. And Propel also operates in a number of other states. And so we are really targeting states where we can both utilize planning grants and also those incentives for our employer partners to adopt and get outcomes with each apprentice that goes through the program. I will say too that the planning grant and the incentives in California have also been really helpful for us in terms of employer adoption. Our primary employer partner there is a community clinic association. We work in the healthcare field, and they operate doing really critical work on really thin margins. And so the employer incentives that we were able to build in has been pivotal, not only in terms of us being able to get off the ground, but in terms of de-risking this for our employer partners who are doing really important work in LA County.
Amazing. Thanks, Sheila. I have a bunch of follow-up questions, but next we'll turn to Michelle. And Michelle, in our report in the case study with UPRO placement discusses the importance of dependable funding versus one-off competitive grant funding. I'm curious if you could say a little bit about how that would help from your experience with UPRO placement.
Absolutely. And thank you. What a great panel today. It's first really important to understand why we have experience in that and what our model looks like. And so for those that don't know who we are, and thank you for the introduction, Chase, UPRO Placement is a for-profit, mission-driven staffing organization supporting the staffing industry in driving scale and apprenticeships, but we're owned by the nonprofit Europe United, and our mission is to support over 50 nonprofit organizations. We also have a few for-profit mission-aligned organizations, and those organizations typically are going after the funding, where we are the turnkey intermediary, bringing all of the stakeholders together to drive the apprenticeship forward. Because, we work in an ecosystem that we all need to work together to really scale this. And that's where the power is with dependable funding. Because the nonprofit partners and the intermediaries with one-off funding, with not having the predictability of the money coming in, then employers are not committing to long-term programs and apprenticeships. And without the long-term commitment, we're not able to build talent pipelines that employers need. So now you're breaking the cycle, and that's not helping any of us, especially the worker and the apprentice that needs a good job. So if we have year over year dependable funding, the biggest piece is that intermediaries can start to plan long term and actually build a strategy. And then we can support pulling all of those pieces together. And then we also serve as the employer to de-risk that for the employer. And in the past year, we've also started doing that with colleges, community colleges, and universities, where we can serve as the employer in their registered apprenticeship programs so that they can get more employers to come on board and adopt apprenticeships. But they also have breaks in their funding. And so, with breaks in funding, you can't commit to staff year after year. You can't commit to high touch, high support resources year after year. So the more we can see long-term funding support, even if it's, over a tiered structure, and what you put in your report is genius. But at the end of the day, intermediaries need to know that they are going to have funding year after year to continue to commit to building better programs, building talent pipeline, building high touch, high support programs. And, as the staffing industry supports, we can scale across employers, across states. And that's where we start to really get the momentum. And we all win if we can do this at scale. But outcomes for sure, and dependable funding is where we need to go from a scale perspective.
Well, that is a pretty compelling case, Michelle. And Helen, I think you may be on the line, but you're like the virtual equivalent of not being on stage yet. Do you want to run up on stage? Like I'm imagining like Price is Right in Zoom. Helen, are you here?
I am, but I can see that I'm here as Catherine Harris. So there's been a little bit of a glitch. So I'm Helen Young Hayes. I'm the founder and CEO of Activate Work, and uh, we started off as a boot camp training provider, driving Perscolas's time-tested, randomized control trial model through Colorado with our 4-month boot camps. We are able to have our graduates experience 128% increase in wages with their first job from 19,000 to 42,000. That is great. We're very, very proud of that statistic. It makes us one of the most evidence-based workforce trainers in the state of Colorado. In 2022, we launched apprenticeship, and we have 4 going on 5 IT apprenticeships. And most notably cybersecurity, where we're spending a lot of time and effort focusing on launching cyber apprenticeships. The economic mobility of apprenticeship, I'll just share our results with you all, because it is really breathtaking, and not only from the perspective of a learner, but also from the perspective of community impact, and more importantly, to the government, which can see this huge economic mobility and individuals moving from tax eaters to taxpayers. With our apprenticeships, individuals pre-training, so pre-boot camp wages were about 19,900. Let's call it 20,000. During their boot camps, during their apprenticeships, they're getting paid by employers roughly $50,000. And then when they're graduating from their apprenticeships, they're earning about $68,000. And so you can see that is over a 3x growth in income, and individuals do not have to go into debt. They get the skills that employers want. And critically, they are really contributing immediately into the tax base, which makes support of apprenticeship from a federal and regional and local basis incredibly compelling. What we have benefited from in the terms of our own funding streams locally that award apprenticeship and apprenticeship intermediaries is not only the federal ABA grant sponsoring Americans Building Apprenticeships, but we also have funding from social impact investors who have funded interest-free loans to our learners to help them afford the boot camp. These are interest-free loans that individuals begin paying back after they get a job that earns over $45,000 a year, and they pay these back at the tune of $100 a month. What we've seen with the interest-free loans is that it helps access, it helps us become more attractive to lower income and more diverse learners. And also, it becomes renewing and replenishing. So that is one way that we've benefited from our own form of pay for success. And then in the state of Colorado, the governor has recently published an executive order that ties employment and training outcomes and investments to evidence-based programs that will partner with and blur the lines between higher ed and short-term credential programs and apprenticeship, really looking to show a lot of accountability to taxpayers for how the government drives economic mobility. And then, in my opinion, there are three different ways that we can focus on pay for success. First of all, to workforce developers and apprenticeship intermediaries like ourselves, it's pretty obvious that we should be rewarding completion rates, job placement, and also job retention. What we have experienced at Activate is thus far a 97% job completion rate of no, so 97% job retention rate of our apprentices into full-time employment. The 3% was due to one of our employers who experienced some, it was a startup, lack of funding. They turned around and then rehired the apprentice when they had the funding about 6 months later. Pay for success to learners, as I mentioned, these types of loans make these funds very much replenishing and evergreen if you can tie it to actual employment. And then finally, pay for success to employers. I would love to see some form of pay for success to employers when an employee is retained for 2 years. The employer returns and refunds some of that money so that we can replenish and add new employers. And remember that the beauty of engaging apprenticeship is that employers have skin in the game. They become talent developers and workforce developers in the form of wages as well as the mentorship, which helps us drive a skilled workforce. So pay for success for employers when the employee is retained, I believe also creates more evergreen opportunities for pay for success.
Amazing. Thank you, Helen, for that context and Activate Work's incredible work, as well as the case for pay for success apprenticeship. Should have teed you up first on that slide instead of me. So there's a really excellent question from the chat, which is, can you define providers versus sponsors in this context, please? Are providers employers and are sponsors training agents? So I will say this nomenclature thing is one of the, I think, the biggest questions that we often get to, especially folks who are coming from other areas of the workforce system. So I will actually defer to my amazing colleagues at Apprenticeships for America if they want to take the first go at answering that question, John or Zach.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sure. So, so let's just a little bit about apprenticeship. So, in apprenticeship, we have employers, and we have sponsors, and we have intermediaries or providers, right? And so sometimes those are all three the same. Sometimes they're different. So let's just walk through them one by one. The employer is the firm that's actually hired the apprentice, who's providing the on-the-job training, and who is paying the apprentice. The sponsor may be the employer, but may also be a third-party organization that's brought together a bunch of employers to participate in an apprenticeship. And sometimes that sponsor is a labor union or an apprenticeship intermediary or a joint labor management group. Can be an educational organization. Sponsors can take lots of different forms. And then finally, there's the intermediary or the provider who's serving as a helper to the employer, connecting the employer with related technical instruction, sometimes administering the program, sometimes working to source apprentices for the program, doing vetting, that sort of thing. And so in any pay for success arrangement, you could be thinking about pay for success funding going to any of those entities. It could be the employer as an incentive to participate in the apprenticeship program. It could be the sponsor to cover some of the costs of the sponsorship, or it could be the intermediary who's providing services and needs to be compensated for the cost of those services. And so our view is that it's probably important at this stage that we have a pay for success program and that individual programs work out what's the right allocation across those three entities. And not every apprenticeship will have all three entities involved. Some will have two, some will just have one. We think it's a little hard to be prescriptive at this stage until we have a better sense of how pay for success works in the U.S. apprenticeship context. But that's sort of what we mean by those three entities. Is that helpful? Did I capture that, Chase?
That made sense to me.
John, can I add something?
Oh, hey, Bob. Great to have you on. Bob, please jump in here.
Yeah.
The expert. Bob, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Bob Lerman. I'm the chair of Apprenticeships for America and co-founder. But the thing that struck me about getting Pay for Success going is the importance of the selling and organizing with employers part, namely that apprenticeships are sold, not bought, as my British friend once said. And the area that is one of the most difficult areas, as all of you guys know, is persuading employers to start apprenticeships. And that takes a lot of work. And without intermediaries, there's no one to do that work. And so that really, the DOL has funded intermediaries through one-off grants. But we believe that this sustainable funding is a much better way to go in terms of reducing overhead costs for the government and for the organizations. And as you all said, providing some sustainable funding. I will make one cautionary note about the funding that DOL is providing. We think it's a good start, but we also think that what we'll need is to scale apprenticeship in America is more in the billions and not in the couple hundred million.
Thanks, Bob.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. And then thank you all for sending these great questions in the chat. This is really helpful. So another, I think, definitional question. If a sponsor applied for the Pay for Success grant, could they keep the funds received to offset the costs to manage the apprenticeship program, or do the funds need to be passed to the employer? And from our perspective, definitely yes, they could keep the funds because we think it's really important for all the management, the coordination, the offering of these services to help people complete and benefit from the apprenticeship and post-exit services potentially as well too. But I do want to toss it to folks on the panel if they want to say a little bit more about that dynamic with employers and just to talk about like how that works from their perspective in practice, the work of what they're doing vis-a-vis the employer. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to say anything. All right, Helen.
First of all, with respect to Pay for Success and it repaying or going to offset the costs, in our instance, we are a nonprofit, and so we don't have a source of income. Therefore, the repayment and replenishment of this just helps us turn around and extend more of these services to others. And the Pay for Success component, of course, obviously comes in not only completion rates, but employment rates. And we do track retention rates, which I think are a very, very strong source of compelling accountability for Pay for Success to training providers. We pass along grants to our employer partners. We have $8,000 in employer incentives that we can give to an employer who hires an apprentice. We got this through one of our federal grants. We also help organize for them and arrange for some of the Colorado state tax credits. And so we make it easier for them to access the government funding that they might not have been aware of. And what this enables us to do is to attract small and medium-sized businesses who might not be able to compete for talent alongside the major corporations. And so this is a way for us, again, to really create more access to some of these funds than would normally be available. Many of the employers are not even aware of it. And so we are an apprenticeship intermediary, which means that our employers simply use the apprenticeships that we created and use them in a turnkey fashion, generating thousands of dollars in savings and in time for employers to experience the benefit of building in their own talent pool. So these are just some of the ways that we divide and conquer the various streams in apprenticeship to employers and share with them. By the way, we believe that the incentives for employers are very, very important. I think everyone likes to feel like they're getting a discount or getting some sort of benefit. But if you're going to entice an employer to hire an employee and pay them $50,000 plus the management time and the overhead, et cetera, their investment in that apprentice is potentially $70,000 plus annually. If you can incent them with 15, 5, 10, $15,000 in reliable apprenticeship funding, the ROI on that with the co-investment from the employer is really the big win that we're looking for. And then I will just say that I fully agree that there are large pockets of funding that could in the US be invested on apprenticeship. And with very high accountability rates. And so maybe moving some of the spending on higher ed, for example, into apprenticeships, this would be a potential source of funds.
Great. Thank you, Helen. And I'm actually going to move along, but if you have other thoughts on this, we just got a bunch of awesome questions in the chat. So one person asked, this has been alluded to, but is there any opportunity to understand how tactically pay for success apprenticeship models can incentivize net new apprenticeships versus just subsidizing existing ones? And I think this is actually related to the previous point in terms of employers versus sponsors. Greg, I don't know if you have anything to say on that, or Julia or Michelle as well. Like, how do we use this funding to grow more apprenticeships, not just, put more money for the ones that are already there? Michelle, go ahead.
I'm happy to jump in. We talk to employers every day that don't have apprenticeships because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the expertise, they need the talent pipeline, they don't know how to build it. They've held off on early career pipeline or replacements because of a skills gap needed, and they need learning programs for specific skills to drive their business. So from the aspect of getting new employers and new sectors into apprenticeship, I think that's where America's talent strategy comes in. I think the message is we need to get more employers. Like if every employer, let's say in the Business Roundtable, committed to 5 apprentices in their organizations, right? If we could pull that off, that's new sectors, that's new employers. And there's opportunities with every sector in their associations. If organizations in those associations would commit to it with this funding, we would get new sectors and new employers. But because our model is fully funded, and then the subsidies that intermediaries get, like Helen's organization, those are used to cover program costs, their staff costs, and then some of it is to subsidize the wages for the actual apprentice, right? And that's where the employer wants to see the credit is, okay, if I'm going to pay a living wage as opposed to minimum wage, then I want the difference subsidized. And how are you going to help me do that? But they don't have also the infrastructure to apply for the grants, to manage the grants, to cover the administration of the paperwork to get a grant. And that's why we need intermediaries so desperately. But I think the only way, again, from an outcomes and dependable source of funding, that alone would bring new employers and new sectors into the world of registered apprenticeships because of the sheer paperwork, cost, infrastructure, and entire programming that is needed to build new talent pipelines.
Amazing. Thanks, Michelle. Greg?
I want to jump in here because as an employment social enterprise, we do have some amount of income as we employ people coming home from prison. Many of our people have been down 10, 15 years. And so when they come home, they need to earn income, but they also need time to re-enter into society again. But currently in Indiana, at least, the labor market has never been this strong in my 30 years of this work on hiring people with felony backgrounds. And so right now, the challenge we have in our business is managing that turn because people are getting hired so quickly and we're bringing in new employers. So that's why the pay for performance would be great. We would have a chance to make up for some of our costs when we're turning employees into new into new employers. So anyway, manufacturing, the recycling field, handling hazardous material, road construction is exploding in our program. And so that's why we're excited, to see this turn of getting people out into new employers. And it's never been this good in my 30 years of this work for a person with a felony.
Amazing. Thanks, Greg. And Julia, we got a question in the chat. I think this is for you. If you could say a little bit about the source of funding for your planning grant. And the other thing that I would ask if you could say about the grant is that there's been a lot of feasibility grants in the Pay for Success field, and not all of those projects actually turned into real programs. So I'm curious, for your perspective, what does it mean to do a planning grant that actually is going to turn into something that's going to be helpful, and how should you all think about that?
Yeah, so the initial grant that we received was the COYA grant, California Opportunity Youth Apprenticeship Grant, and that's a planning grant with the primary goal of having your apprenticeship program registered with DAS with the state of California. And so as long as you hit that, you then become eligible for their implementation funding, which we are now eligible for and can continue on and plan for sustainability based on our eligibility for the implementation funding. California also has a number of other per apprentice funding opportunities, like their AIF funding, that you can braid together to make the program really truly sustainable. And with each of those opportunities, we are planning a cut for our employer partners to incentivize them to grow with us. That also has made it easier for us to think about, like, that planning grant made it possible for us to think about and grow our apprenticeship work, not only in California, but in other states, because we had the space and the money and the capacity to do so. And that has really informed our work in some other states. So that has been really helpful for us to get a new program off the ground. And it is directly correlated to our ability to grow apprenticeships in other states with additional employers as well. So it's been pivotal for us in terms of our strategy moving forward.
Amazing. Thank you, Julia. And then we got a few very timely logistical questions about the upcoming funding opportunity I want to be sure to get to. So one was a question about who's the ideal applicant for this funding opportunity, or what type of partnership? Is it state level, trade organization, school, or employer? I will just say, at this point, it seems like things are fairly open-ended, as you heard from Zach. You all may still be thinking about it, and that may be, something they can shape by doing these as a cooperative agreements. But Zach and John, I'm curious if there's anything else you would like to add on that point.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here and say I think these because of there's going to only be a relatively 4 or 5 awards. That means that there's going to need to be a certain amount of volume for each awardee. To us, that then means an organization that either itself is doing a lot of apprenticeships, or more likely is working in partnership with a network of organizations. And so we think collaboration is really going to be a key part of a successful award here. The other thing we'll say is that there's really a need for a certain amount of administrative capacity here. The messaging we hear loud and clear from the Department of Labor is they're looking for relatively low overhead on these grants. They really want the money out on the street, which means that the organizations that have strong capacities for doing transaction processing at relatively low cost are going to have an advantage here. And so that would be another sort of component. And then the last thing I'll say is, because of the focus on particular industries, except for the one catch-all for scale, that suggests organizations that have deep ties, capacity to understand and serve the needs of particular industries are going to be advantaged here. But I think I agree with you, Chase. I don't think there's necessarily anything that says a community college couldn't do this, or a state government couldn't do this, or a nonprofit, or a for-profit. I think there's many opportunities to think about different organizational types playing this role.
And I would just say that one thing we've seen limit, I think, the success of Pay for Success in the past is when only certain organizations can participate. Like CIPRA, the program I mentioned earlier at Treasury, has been terrific, but it's limited to state and local governments as lead applicants. And I think that's actually been a challenge, as often there are non-governmental organizations that could work with those states and localities, but the states and localities don't actually have the capacity themselves to do the applications. And then someone else asked about the $5,000 per apprenticeship funding model, or funding amount, that seemed like a very small amount. John, Zach, want to say anything about that? And then we can also turn to our panel to talk about some of the mechanics of financing here.
Zach, do you want to jump in on this, or I can either way?
Sure. I think $5,000 does sound relatively low, but we've seen in some of the past grant awards, especially looking at the American Apprenticeship Initiative, this was kind of the average cost that DOL was sort of looking at in terms of incentivizing and paying for part of that apprenticeship. So we're not expecting that $5,000 is going to cover the full freight of the apprenticeship. Of course not. The Department of Commerce looked at the kind of the range of what apprenticeships can cost, anywhere between $20,000 and $250,000. But we do think that the $5,000, and as a previous intermediary, this gets people off the fence and into the game to at least take a conversation on apprenticeships and consider the opportunity, because you really need to have that value add up front.
Great. From the panel, anyone have a quick lightning round response to the financing question? Greg?
Just real quick, when you have an employment social enterprise and you're generating revenue, or a staffing arm and you're generating revenue, that can help offset, or this 5,000 becomes a way to make your model work a little bit better. But obviously, it depends on what they're going to pay for. That's the key piece.
Yeah, Chase, I'd just like to add one key point, which is that the apprentices have to be contributing to the organization. Otherwise, the whole situation won't work. We have no expectation that these funds will really pay for the full wage costs and other things. But when you hire somebody to do something, they're going to be contributing to the organization's output, and a good apprenticeship actually the apprentice can start contributing on day one. So what we're counting on is that the employer will come to know that this model of learning by doing, of contributing to production, of getting learning the organization, learning the occupation in great detail, but while contributing to production, is a good investment.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. And we are running short on time, so I just want to say thank you so much, Greg, Julia, Michelle, and Helen, for joining us today, as well as the incredible work your organizations are doing. And I want to turn it back to John and Zach to close us out. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. And it's been great to be with 400 of my favorite people in the apprenticeship field. So thank you for joining us this morning and afternoon. I just want to talk briefly to AFA's work going forward on Pay for Success and this particular opportunity. We expect that we'll do another webinar that will focus entirely on the grant opportunity once the formal notice of funding availability is released. So be watching for that. If you haven't already, we encourage you to fill out the survey that we're taking right now for folks who are considering applying for the opportunity. It'll be a way for us to identify folks that we should be reaching out to on this opportunity. And also, we're seeing this as an opportunity to do some matchmaking between people who are looking to go in on the grant and people who are looking to work with people who are going in on the grant. So please do fill out that opportunity. And then finally, if you want to go deeper on Pay for Success, particularly in the manufacturing sector, encourage you to sign up for the webinar next week that we're doing with our colleagues in Arkansas, looking at the new national funding program that the state of Arkansas is going to be running to support manufacturing apprenticeships on a Pay for Success basis. So lots more to come on this. Looking forward to working with this group. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and have a great rest of your day.